And welcome to Nats Chat for Tuesday, March 26, 2024. What is the 2024 Nationals season preview installment of the podcast? Yes, we have arrived at that point this Thursday, March 28th, opening day for what is the 20th season of Nationals baseball, 2005 through 2024. 20 seasons, 2 decades. You know, there was a time in which Washington, D.C., again, having a major league team was like borderline unthinkable. Here we are now about to begin the 20th season of Nationals baseball, along with a man who has covered the Nats since they came to D.C., MASNsports.com Nationals insider Mark Zuckerman. I'm Al Galdi, host of the Al Galdi podcast, and we are with you for season number 4 of the Nats Chat podcast, for which there is a new episode the morning after every Nats game day. Everyone, weekday, weekend, good times, bad times, doesn't matter, with you the morning after every Nats game day. We have a website that we encourage you to check out, natschatpodcast.com. We now have a YouTube channel that we invite you to check out. You can see our smiling faces as we tape episodes of the podcast. Just go to YouTube and search for Nats Chat. Our YouTube handle is at Nats Chat Podcast. Also, Nats Chat now is on a second radio station in the state of Virginia. We are taking over the Commonwealth, the Priority Auto Sports Radio 94.1 in Virginia Beach, the home of the Scott Jackson Show. Scott Jackson, a longtime friend of mine, a great friend of this podcast. A salute to Scott for making this happen. All right, so the Nats begin their regular season this Thursday afternoon at the Cincinnati Reds at 4:10. Josiah Gray will be the Nats starting pitcher. As we are taping this late Monday morning, the Nats regular season opening pitching staff is set, and the regular season opening position player portion of the Major League roster is mostly set, and it appears as if it will include infielder Trey Lipscomb. The Nats this past Friday afternoon announced having reassigned a number of players to minor league camp, including the team's top 3 prospects for MLB Pipeline, outfielders Dylan Cruz and James Wood, and third baseman Brady House. But still with the Nats at the major league level is Lipscomb, who may have supplanted Luis Garcia as the Nats' number 1 second baseman. Mark, it is nice to be with you for season number 4 of this podcast. And if I had said that a top Nats prospect would be making the Major League regular season opening roster, you would have said, okay, James Wood, maybe Dylan Cruz. It looks like Trey Lipscomb will be the man who gets that honor.
It is why, Al, you have to be so careful about the narratives going into spring training and then what comes out of spring training, because very often it's not the same thing that you expect going in. Things happen. There are surprises, and this would qualify as a surprise, at least at the start of camp. Over the course of those 6 weeks, though, in Florida, every single day you saw something from Trey Lipscomb, and you heard from people with the team that made you think to yourself, boy, they really like this guy. And there was a point probably early to midway through camp that I thought to myself, this guy's going to be a starter for them, either at second or third base sometime this year, maybe sooner rather than later. And then there was a point a week or so ago that I thought to myself, this guy might be the starting second or third baseman come opening day. Now, we still don't know as we tape this. It's possible he does get sent down. They've got a decision to make, and there are ramifications for who he might take the job from, and that could ultimately prevent it, at least for a little while. But I think that is fascinating just to consider that it's even a possibility here on the cusp of opening day for a guy who was drafted just 2 years ago out of the University of Tennessee, a 3rd-round pick. We're not talking about a blue chip prospect. He doesn't even rank, among most of these rankings across prospects across baseball. Internally, like I said, they have liked him a lot for a while, but around the sport, he has been off the radar a lot. And let's be clear, this is not somebody who projects to be a superstar the way that James Wood or Dylan Cruz might, but he's a really solid player and does everything well and can play multiple positions. And frankly, among all those kids who've been there, that were there all spring, he looked the most ready to me consistently from day one through the end, both offensively and defensively. And so that's why I think there is strong consideration, maybe even leaning towards Trey Lipscomb making the opening day roster.
He is their number 16 prospect for MLB Pipeline, a terrific exhibition season, OPS of 995. And, you think about this logically, you're not going to have Lipscomb make the Major League regular season opening roster just to sit on the bench, right? If he's going to make it, he's going to make it because he's going to be playing every day at a spot. And it's hard to ignore the timing of this. This has happened as Luis Garcia has had a rather rough exhibition season. Now, he has had his moments. It's not like it's been all bad, but he has been publicly called out by Davey Martinez for some screw ups. It was so hard to ignore what happened on Sunday afternoon. The Nats' Grapefruit League ending 10-1 exhibition loss at the New York Mets in Port St. Lucie, Florida. Garcia botching a routine double play grounder and what was like the ultimate exclamation mark on his, shall we say, shaky exhibition season. So I would look at it like this. If Lipscomb makes the major league regular season opening roster, I would think it would be to be the everyday second baseman, or at least the number one second baseman. How much of this is about Luis Garcia? In other words, if Garcia had had a better exhibition season, would we be talking about Lipscomb in this way?
Probably not. They might still really like him, and maybe they would be thinking about him at third base, although maybe not on opening day because you did go and sign Nick Senzel in the offseason. But I think they go in tandem with each other. The really good, solid play of Lipscomb and the shaky play, as you said, of Garcia. Now, one thing I'll say though is, and again, we don't know as we tape this how this is going to work out. Yes, if he makes the team, Trey Lipscomb is going to play, if not every day, very close to every day. But, and I asked Davey Martinez this a few days ago, and he gave the answer that I kind of suspected could be the answer. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the same position every day. He is really versatile. He won the minor league Gold Glove Award at third base last year. Now that's across all of minor league baseball, rated as the best defensive third baseman. Once he got to Double A at Harrisburg, they had Brady House there, and so he knew and they knew they needed to try him out at different spots. He's played all over the infield, all four positions actually. Spring training was second base, shortstop, and third. And I thought looked comfortable at all of them. Maybe he's best at third, but I didn't see a guy who looked out of place up the middle at all. So I do think there is a scenario in which both he and Luis Garcia make the team. And that would include then Trey Lipscomb playing, let's say, 3 days a week at second base, 3 days a week at third base, perhaps maybe even filling in on occasion for CJ Abrams at shortstop. And in that scenario, the guy who might be out of a job is Nasim Nunez, the Rule 5 draft pick, who's a backup infielder and really a great defensive player and base runner who doesn't hit a whole lot. I think that could be part of the discussion that they're having as far as what to do here if they don't think he's really worth hanging on to all season. So long term, yeah, you'd like Lipscomb to be an everyday player, and he won't make the big leagues if he's not playing every day, but it doesn't have to be at one spot. And Dave even said he reminds him in a lot of ways of a guy he had in Tampa Bay years ago, Ben Zobrist, kind of the ultimate super utility guy who wasn't a backup. He just played everywhere and usually somewhere different every day.
Ben Zobrist, like an all-time analytics darling, a guy who was like the king of WAR for a good portion of time in MLB. So yeah, it is funny how these things play out. This news about Cruz and Wood and House this past Friday afternoon. I don't want to say it was like an oh by the way thing, but I don't think anybody was like stunned by it. We don't know exactly where those guys are going to be deployed in terms of the minor league level. It does sound like Wood will be at Triple A. Is it safe to say that Wood will be the first among those three to be called up to the majors this season, or would you not say that?
I think so, provided that he performs the way you expect him to. And again, none of these guys has played at AAA, including Lipscomb, by the way. That's why it would be a big jump for him if he makes the team. I think Wood, out of all of them, looked the closest to being ready, excluding Lipscomb. He started off with a bang. Obviously, we talked plenty about him earlier in the spring. Kind of cooled off along the way, but he did get hot again later. Hit a game-tying homer the other day, followed shortly after by Dylan Cruz with a game-winning single in a good ninth inning rally. And then they were sent down the next day, of course, because that's how that always seems to work. I think Wood would be the first one to be called up, and I think it depends on his performance and when they believe he's ready, and then what you have at the big league level, whether it's the guys in left field, whether it's center field, or if you have an injury to something else, you could always look to call him up. I think from what I saw this spring, I think James Wood was a cut above the rest of those guys in terms of big league readiness. Dylan Cruz, Brady House had some moments, but for the most part, watching them, I thought to myself, they're not ready for this yet. They've got a ways to go. They looked overmatched at times. That's not a bad thing. Like, it's supposed to be that way when you're that young and inexperienced and you're playing against big leaguers in spring training. So my hunch is that those two both go back to Double A, where they ended the season, but really didn't spend a lot of time there last year. So I'm pumping the brakes a little on Cruz and House in terms of like early season big league debuts. I still think it can happen this year, And so much depends on what they do in season, not in spring training. But based on what I saw for the last 6 weeks, those guys looked to me to be a step behind, maybe even 2 steps behind where James Wood is at.
There was other Nats roster moves on Friday afternoon. There was other Nats roster news on Friday afternoon. The Nats this past Friday afternoon unconditionally released starting pitcher Zach Davies, meaning that Trevor Williams is in the Nationals regular season opening rotation. So this brings us back to something that we talked about on the last installment of the podcast, Jackson Rutledge. The thinking in the Nats demoting Rutledge the prior Sunday, so March 17th, optioning him to AAA Rochester, was that, hey, Zach Davies, minor league contract from which he could opt out. Perhaps the Nats, in a pursuit of starting pitching depth, would demote Rutledge, have Davies make the regular season opening roster, and then at least you have another arm, serviceable arm, to begin the regular season. But Zach Davies ended up crumbling. The Nats on Friday afternoon unconditionally released him. He in the 2024 exhibition season ended up with an ERA of 9. His final exhibition start was a disaster, 9 runs in 3 2/3 innings in a 13-4 loss to the St. Louis Cardinals in West Palm Beach, Florida, this past Wednesday evening. So you wind up with Trevor Williams in that rotation to at least begin the season. So, you look at this in hindsight and you say, boy, should they have optioned Rutledge when they did? Should Rutledge be starting the regular season at the major league level? Now, I do wonder if maybe the Nats are playing the service time game with Rutledge. And if they are, I'm fine with that. But given the benefit of hindsight here, should Rutledge be in that opening day rotation? Or do you think that there is a wisdom to what the Nats have done here?
I understand what they're doing here, and it's a couple of things. Number one, Rutledge made 4 big league starts last year for the first time in his career. He is a guy who's had an injury history. I think they're going to want to watch his innings all year long. A little easier to do that at the start at AAA, where you can maybe space out his starts, pull him after 4 or 5 innings if he's pitching well, and save some bullets for later in the season. I think there's that. I think there's also, and you heard this all spring from Davey and Mike Rizzo and others with the organization, they kept bringing up the fact that they made it through last season with only 8 starting pitchers and how unusual that was and how they would love for that to be the case again, but they know it's probably not going to be the case. Guys are going to get hurt along the way. And so I think the thinking here is protect themselves from the unknown that's going to happen. And to know that Trevor Williams, while he may not be part of the future and they're not expecting a whole lot out of him right now, and maybe on merit didn't deserve to be one of the top 5 starters to begin the year, they're going to need him to make starts along the way. So might as well start with him in the rotation and then move him out as things progress. Jackson Rutledge is going to be the first guy called up. Davey pretty much made that clear. Whenever there's a reason to, whether it's for performance or for injury, he's going to be the first one up. Cade Cavalli, by all counts, they're hoping he's ready sometime around June. He's going to be getting the chance to pitch in the big leagues when that happens. And there are other young guys coming who are, a little further off, but I think they do expect to see them sometime this year. Mitchell Parker, DJ Hers, Cole Henry, all guys who were in big league camp and they liked. And so I think this is a classic case of we make a big deal about who's going to be the 5th starter on opening day. That doesn't mean he's going to stay the 5th starter for long. And reading between the lines, they gave him the job, yes, by default, but I think the leash is really short there. And I think the moment that either they believe Rutledge is ready or Williams struggles or Cavalli's ready or whatever else might happen, that they make that move and shift Trevor Williams to the bullpen. I don't see him making a lot of starts for the team this year. I think he is sort of the insurance plan for other things happening that you're not expecting. So if, God forbid, Mackenzie Gore, Josiah Gray got hurt, you wouldn't have to now move him from the bullpen back into the rotation. Let him start the year in the rotation. You can always then move him to the bullpen later on. And I do think that will happen, maybe even sooner than we all think.
Well, and to that point, Davey Martinez has only announced the first 4 starting pitchers for the Nats for the regular season. Post-game session with you guys this past Saturday afternoon revealed the starters for games 3 and 4, Jake Irvin and Mackenzie Gore, with the idea, presumably, that Gore gets that number 4 spot to start the regular season home opener. But the Nats, as is usually the case, bunch of off days early in the regular season. So I would think that we may not see actually Trevor Williams make that first start until maybe a few weeks into the regular season. Is that what you're thinking?
The first time they need officially a fifth starter would be the finale of the homestand before they go on a West Coast trip. I think that would be game 9, maybe, of the season. So yeah, they haven't announced it, but I would not be surprised because again, there's no true long man in the bullpen. There's guys who can pitch 2 innings, maybe 3 in a pinch. I would expect for that first week of the season that Trevor Williams is actually in the bullpen as a long man, and then eventually, once they need a fifth starter, he takes the ball for that one.
I do want to say this about Jackson Rutledge. I do think that this is a big season for him. Jackson Rutledge was the number 17 overall pick in the 2019 MLB draft, and he was a college player selection. Was taken out of San Jacinto College, a public community college in Texas. So, drafted 5 years ago in the first round as a college pitcher, he really should be a starting pitcher at the major league level by now. This season is going to be his age 25 season. So it is time to get her going with Jackson Rutledge. Now, it's been a peculiar circumstance. 2021, 2022 season struggled with injury and ineffectiveness. The COVID damaged 2020 season didn't do any prospect any good. Has been good to see him get back on track here. Made those 4 major league starts last September. Had mixed results. But I think from a 30,000 foot perspective, first round pick, 2019 college pitcher, like it's time to get moving here. It's time for him to be a contributor at the major league level. So hopefully we do see that this season.
Yeah, 100%. I think they believe that. I think what they saw from him this spring, they saw progression from him and believe that he is, ready, if not close to ready. And I think in their perfect world, and we'll see how it all plays out, he could kind of be like what Jake Irvin was last year. First guy called up, maybe it's a month into the season, and then hopefully pitches well enough that he never goes back. That would be the ideal scenario for him. And they don't view him as, in the same category as a Mackenzie Gore or Cade Cavalli or even Josiah Gray. They don't need him to be the ace of the staff moving forward, but they would love for him to be a reliable big league pitcher for several years. And I think he is on the right track. It took a while for him to get there, but I do think he's on the right track. And I do think we're going to see him fairly early in the season, be my guess.
The Nats bullpen to begin the regular season is as follows: Kyle Finnegan, Hunter Harvey, Dylan Floro, Tanner Rainey, Jordan Weems, Robert Garcia, Derek Law, and Matt Barnes. Garcia, the lone lefty in the pen to begin the regular season, and the Nats have officially placed relievers Mason Thompson and Jose A. Ferrer on the 60-day injured list. I guess no real shockers in terms of that bullpen to begin the season, but what jumped out at you?
What jumped out at me was just how many guys they had who pitched really well this spring, and they wound up having to cut pitchers who any other year would have been locks to make this team. You're talking about Richard Blyer had a great spring. Jacob Barnes had a great spring. Robert Gesellman, who was one of the earlier cuts, had a great spring. Again, a year, 2 years, even during the Nationals peak, they were always putting pitchers like that on their opening day staff. And this year they had too many of them, and they couldn't afford to keep them all. And so I think that's a huge plus for them. And again, the ones who do go to AAA, and Richard Blyer said he will. They're waiting to hear on Jacob Barnes if he's going to go or not, or if he gets an opportunity to go somewhere else. But they're going to have some depth to call upon if they do need help. Now, after all that, it's a little strange that there's only one lefty in the bullpen, and it's Robert Garcia. They like Ferrer. He's going to be out for a while with that injury. Like I said, Blyer pitched really well, and I'm sure they would call up if they needed to. And even Joe LaSorsa, who was dropped from the 40-man roster over the winter, he had an excellent spring and somebody I think they would call upon. So I'll be interested to see how the composition of that shakes out over the course of the year. But they have 8 relievers there who either have track records of success in the past or pitched really well in spring training. All these guys have some experience. There's no, last year, Hobie Harris made the opening day bullpen. How many people remember Hobie Harris? Probably not a lot of you. He made it because he had a great spring, didn't last for long, wasn't very good in the big leagues. We may never see him again. That's not the case this year. Doesn't guarantee they're going to pitch well. We know how bullpen performances fluctuate year to year, but they put themselves, I think, in the best possible position this year to have a good bullpen coming into the year and to have depth where they can call on others when things happen during the course of the season.
All right, so let's get into some bigger picture thoughts with the Nationals as they begin their 2024 regular season. So I guess it depends on when you define the rebuild as having started. But if we say it started in the middle of the 2021 season, this is year number 4 of the rebuild. And I wouldn't say that there are like major expectations for the Nats to be good this season, but I do think that there is a hope and maybe even an anticipation that we do start to see the fruits of the rebuild this season, especially with the likes of Dylan Cruz and James Wood and Brady House hopefully making their major league regular season debuts. We have approached these last few seasons as saying the wins and losses don't matter. This is more about the young potential building blocks and how they perform. To what extent do wins and losses for the Nats matter to you for this season?
It's funny you asked that, Al, because that's a question I asked several people with the team here in the last week or two of camp, because I wanted to get their take on that. And what you heard from them was a little more than has been the case the last couple of years, acknowledging that, yeah, it's time for this to start showing up in wins and losses. Now, they made a big step last year, getting from 55 to 71. That probably exceeded what they should have been. If you look at the peripherals and all that kind of stuff, they probably were a little lucky. They won a lot of close games. They had that really nice August stretch where it felt like they won one-run games every single night. So maybe they weren't truly a 71-win team. But in my mind, I do think it's important for them to exceed that total this year. To get to 500, I think is probably asking for too much. Maybe in a best case scenario, they can pull something like that off. But I think somewhere in the mid 70s is appropriate. And really, the key to it, and this can still happen with fewer than 71 wins. You hope it isn't the case. But I've been trying to tell everyone, and I'm writing about it as well. I really think you have to look at this season in two parts. There's the team they're going to start the year with, and there's the team they're going to end the year with, and they're going to look different. And the team they end the year with is going to be hopefully all of, if not most of, these top prospects, in addition to the young building blocks they already have here. And the idea would be that this is a team that continually gets better and more exciting and younger over the course of the season, so that by the end of this year, you're saying to yourself, okay, we see it all coming together now. They're all big league ready. And now we know where they could go a year from now. Now, bad things are going to happen. Unforeseen events are going to happen, of course, along the course of the season. But I do think it's reasonable to expect more wins from them. And I think it's important not to pay too much attention to how they do in April and May. I think this season is much more about what happens June, July, August, and September.
Yeah, so I've said, and I said this late last season, I think this season is huge for this rebuild. I think this season is almost like a crossroads season in the rebuild. I think we're going to have a lot more clarity on whether the rebuild is working or not by the end of this season. I think one of the reassuring things about rebuilds in modern MLB is that when they work, you know that they work, and you don't really have to wonder if they work. And what often happens, and it's so interesting to me how this is that the step forward season ends up being a season or two prior to when you thought that season might be. Like, I think back to the Orioles, not last season, but in 2022, this giant step forward out of nowhere off having been atrocious for multiple seasons. I think back to the Cubs in 2015, making the NLCS in a season in which the Cubs were not anticipated to do that. I mean, even the Nats in 2012, I know they finished around 500 in 2011, but the Nats in 2012 ran away with the National League East. That wasn't anticipated. That was a 98 win ball club in that regular season. So what I'm really hoping for this year, and I don't know how likely this is, but that you get something like that with the Nats this season, not necessarily a playoff making season, but what if they finished around 500? What if they had a season like they had in 2011, 80 and 81 in that regular season? Like, that might announce, hey, this thing is working. Because I think when you are multiple seasons into a rebuild and you're still asking the question, is this working? I think chances are it isn't working, because if it was working, you wouldn't have to ask that question. It would be like just screaming obvious in your face that the rebuild is working. So I'm really anxious to see how this team performs this year. I think you make a great point about almost dividing the season into two parts, because I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so you wonder if we might see a surge by the Nats in the second half of the season, or at least much improved play by the Nats in the second half of the season, to make that final record more appealing, to maybe have the Nats on the periphery of wild card contention. I know a lot of this sounds like glass half full talk, but again, if you look at these rebuilds, when they work in sometimes spectacular ways, and things just kind of all come together a season or two prior to when you thought they might. And so I think if you're a Nats fan, that's really what you're hoping for this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And you cited examples of teams that were like that. The Cincinnati Reds last year kind of fit that category. My bold prediction here is I think at some point this summer, we're going to say to ourselves, hey, whoa, the Nats are kind of in the race, somewhat in the wild card race, fringes of the race. I don't think they're going to stay there all the way through the end. Maybe it is a late surge. They're way behind. They kind of come up and try to make up ground along the way. But yeah, my prediction is that at some point this year, they're going to go on a nice little winning streak. And we're going to look at the standing and say, hey, the Nats are only 3 games out of it, something along those lines. And that's going to bring a lot of optimism to everyone. Now, can they hold on all year long like that? Maybe not. But I think that would be a good taste of what's to come for them. And let's remember, we're talking pie in the sky here, but 84 wins were good enough to make the playoffs last year in the expanded wild card era. 71 to 84 is a big lead. But if you are hovering around 500, you are in the race. And so I think that's going to be something that'll be fascinating to watch as the summer plays out. If they are playing well and hovering around that mark, and now you start calling up some of the prospects, and we get to the trade deadline, I mean, it could actually turn into a very different kind of narrative for this team come July and August than we've seen here in a few years.
Yeah, especially with the expanded postseason, you have to be really bad to not at least be on like the periphery of postseason contention come August. Like you really have to be a bad team to not at least be in that conversation to some degree. So you would hope that the Nats at least are in that mix. Davey Martinez. So it was last August 22nd that the Nats officially announced having agreed with Davey on a multi-year contract extension, what reportedly is a 2-year extension with an option for a 3rd season. As we discussed on a recent episode of the podcast, he now is like the dean of Washington, D.C. managers / head coaches. He's been the Nats manager since October 2017, a long time ago in the realm of sports. It's so interesting with Davey. We've talked about this previously, but this will be his 7th season as Nationals manager. He's only had what you would call one good season. Now, it was a World Series championship season. The 2018 season was a winning season, but that was considered a disappointing season. And then 2020 through this past season, all losing seasons. The fact that he just got extended might render this question moot. Like, the Lerners are not the type of ownership to fire a manager after just extending him. But is there pressure on Davey for this team to be better this season? And if the team isn't better, does Davey take the fall? It seems unlikely Davey's job being on the line this year. I'm not trying to be overly dramatic with that. But boy, you take a step back and you look at his tenure, the great 2019 season, but beyond that, a lot of losing, a lot of disappointment. It's not his fault. I think most people understand that. But, you can only have so many losing seasons, you would think, as a manager. Do you see Davey as having pressure on him this year or not so much?
So it's funny. I'm on these email lists from these gambling sites that send out odds all the time. And I usually just open them up and immediately delete them. And I certainly don't publish them because I'm not interested in forwarding that stuff along. But they sent one out a couple weeks ago that said, who's the first MLB manager to be fired this year? And they got the odds on everyone. And number 1 on the list was Aaron Boone. You can understand that one. The Yankees are facing a lot of pressure. Boone is facing a lot of pressure to win right now. And number 2 on that list was Davey Martinez. And I thought to myself, do these people pay any attention to what's going on here? Now, I can understand based on what you were saying in a vacuum, given the track record, given the state of the organization, given where they are, and maybe some increased expectation this year, that you might say to yourself, okay, there should be some pressure on the manager to start winning. And yeah, I get all that. But let's look at the specifics of this one. The new contract, number 1. The Lerner family, who, as we know, generally speaking, is not one to just eat money to that extent. But beyond that, and I think it's so funny how this stuff works. You said he only had one, really good season here in town so far. But when that one really good season ends with a parade, it buys you so much goodwill that can last for a long time. And we discussed this, a year or 2 ago. If not for that World Series, he doesn't survive the rebuild. Mike Rizzo probably doesn't survive the rebuild either. But because of that, it's recent enough that they both did, and now they've been given this opportunity to build the team again into a contender. And so, to me, and it's both my opinion and what I imagine Mark Lerner and Mike Rizzo's opinions are as well, I don't see that kind of pressure on Davey right now. Unless there was something that was clear that he was losing the clubhouse, or they were regressing in fundamentals or other kinds of things. And it just felt like they're not moving in the right direction. And he's not the right guy to lead the young kids along. I can't see it happening at all. A year from now, different story. Maybe there's a different level of pressure on them by then. But right now, in the first year of this new contract and where they are in the rebuild and the goodwill that he's built up, I can't see it happening at all. I don't know what it would take. I mean, remember the Orioles famously started, what, 0-22 in 1988? And Cal Ripken Sr. was fired 6 games into it and replaced by Frank Robinson. I don't know that an 0-20 start would do in Davey Martinez right now. I hope it doesn't come to that. I don't want to find out if that's true. I don't know that that would do it, just given where they are as a franchise right now.
There are so many unconventional things about this Nats rebuild. One is that the manager who went down with the team into the rebuild is still the manager and may well be the manager coming out of the rebuild. I mean, it's rare enough for the manager during a rebuild to be with the team coming out of the rebuild. The fact that the manager who went down with the team into the rebuild went through the rebuild and now may still be with the team coming out of the rebuild is like, I don't know, it feels like it's unprecedented. I mean, you never see that. And then you have all the other stuff with the front office, which we talked about a few months back, and which I still think is an underemphasized item with the Nats over the last 12 months, this revamping of the front office beneath Mike Rizzo in the middle of a rebuild. That is not normal. That is not something that you usually see. And I think there are a lot of questions to be asked about that. You, of course, have what I still would label as ownership uncertainty. I know the Lerners are no longer openly selling the team, but I know that there are people who think that if the right offer came along, they would sell the team. So there's still that kind of floating around in all this. I want to get your take on this. The potential building blocks who have been at the major league level for a few seasons now: Josiah Gray, Mackenzie Gore, CJ Abrams, Keibert Ruiz. We saw Gray have a really nice step forward season last season, so I'm assuming he's not the answer here. But out of those guys, who most needs to demonstrate improvement this season, do you think?
Oh, boy. I think it's a big year for Keibert Ruiz because I think this could be kind of a referendum on whether he is the catcher long-term or not. I don't think they would give up on him. Obviously, they signed him to a long-term extension, but maybe there are concerns defensively that he's not going to be the catcher, and so you got to look somewhere else. So I think they want to see improvement there. I personally believe this is going to be a big year for Mackenzie Gore. I think, Josiah Gray got the opening day assignment, and rightfully so. Mackenzie Gore's getting the home opener, and that was by design. Davey revealed he wanted to give him that honor. It's sort of like another indication of, hey, we are focusing on the young guys now. We're not living in the past anymore. So I think that was a good move. I really believe come the end of the year, Mackenzie Gore is going to be their best starting pitcher. We saw, I think, enough of it last year to see how good he can be when he's on. It's just a matter of eliminating those really bad starts or making those really bad starts just into okay starts, not having the blow-ups. But I think this is a big year for him to do that. So I'd probably put him there. I'd say the pressure on Keibert Ruiz. I think CJ Abrams is going to be fantastic. I think we know what Josiah Gray is now. So pressure on Ruiz, but I think a lot of optimism about Gore. And I want to throw one other name into the mix here who we don't talk about a lot, but had a great spring, and that's Jake Irvin. And a guy who, again, not listed among the top prospects. He kind of came out of nowhere last year, and it's not like he was great for them, but he was solid in a role none of us were ever expecting from him. He closed out his spring with 15 consecutive scoreless innings, allowing, I think it was 4 hits and 2 walks in that time. Now, it's spring training. You don't want to read too much into it, and I'm not saying Jake Irvin's about to become number 1, number 2 starter, but if he can step up just a little bit for them, that could be this unexpected, like, number 3 starter for them in the long run. I could see him having a big year for them, and a guy who we weren't really thinking of as a building block in the long term, actually putting himself in that mix.
He was arguably the most pleasant surprise of last national season. And, we talk about like prospects, who's going to work out, who's not going to work out. They're not all going to work out. But another thing that you can get in rebuilds is what you just talked about, which is guys who weren't supposed to ever really be factors end up being factors. And maybe Irvin can be one of those guys. That would be great. The team certainly could use that. It's funny with Keibert Ruiz. He just signed an 8-year contract extension last spring training season. So you'd say, well, contractually speaking, what pressure is there? This guy's locked up for years to come. But of course, 8 years, $50 million. If it doesn't work out, it's not like you're wedded to this guy for years to come. I mean, it would be unfortunate if he didn't end up being the catcher for years to come, but it's not like you have to stick by him no matter what. And yeah, it was a rough year last year, especially defensively. I'm anxious to see with CJ Abrams. He demonstrated real improvement as last season went on. Is this guy a nice player, or can he be a great player? You look at where he was drafted. He was drafted in a spot that would dictate he has the potential to be a great player. How good is the good of CJ Abrams? He's still so long. He's still so young. He offers that 5-tool player potential. Really interested to see if Abrams can take that next step this season and maybe establish himself as not just, again, a nice player, but a really good player, maybe even a great player. He has that talent.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And what we saw in the second half from him last year was as good all-around play as you're going to see from any shortstop in baseball. Hit for power, ran the bases incredibly well, really improved defensively, and became a good shortstop in the end. And I think that's just the cusp of it. Again, this was a top prospect, as you outlined. He and Mackenzie Gore were big-time prospects acquired in the Juan Soto trade. There's a reason the Nats wanted both those guys in addition to the others who are still yet to arrive. I believe he can be a top 10 shortstop in the majors, maybe even top 5 shortstop in the majors. A very talented position, as we know. But I think around baseball kind of got overlooked what this guy did over the second half of last season. He was phenomenal in what he did, and the hope would be that was just the stepping stone to what he's going to be this year and beyond.
All right. Are you prepared to put forth your prediction for the Nationals record in the 2024 MLB regular season? Season number 20 of Nationals baseball. Not since 2019 has this team had a winning regular season record. Does that change? Might that change in 2024? The floor is yours. The official Zuckerman prediction for the Nationals this coming season.
I like how I have to go first because now you can base your guess on what I say. You can underbid, overbid, whatever you want to do with that. As I said, I think really this year is about not how it starts, but how it ends. I think at the end of this year, you're looking at a roster that includes CJ Abrams, Mackenzie Gore, Keibert Ruiz, Josiah Gray, Cade Cavalli, James Wood, Trey Lipscomb, Dylan Cruz, and maybe Robert Hassel or Brady House or both of them, in addition to what they already have in-house here. There's a lot of talent there, way more talent than we've seen here, maybe more young talent than they've ever had. Not proven talent, but young talent. There are going to be some growing pains along the way, probably. You can't expect them all to burst on the scene and be incredible. That just doesn't happen, although I guess it's kind of happened in Baltimore here in the last year or two. But that's not the norm. So there will be some bumps in the road. But like I said, I do think at some point this summer, we're going to look up at the standings and say, wow, the Nats are kind of in the race. And then I think they cool off at the end. And in the end, they finish with 76 wins, which is a 5-win improvement from last year. It's not a 500 record, but I think that's a good stepping stone for ownership to say, we are going to spend money next winter. We think we can contend in 2025. We have the pieces now in place. So I'm going 76 and 86.
I mentioned this being season number 7 for Davey Martinez as Nationals manager. His first record was 82 and 80, 2018. I believe that will be the Nats record for this season. I am predicting a winning record. Yes, a step forward season for our Washington Nationals this season.
Let the record show Al Galdi is more optimistic than I am. I am stunned. I am truly stunned.
I am. And it's a weird deal because, like I said, I still think that there are a lot of questions with the bigger picture, ownership, the front office, the ability to draft and develop well. But what's undeniable is that there is a lot of young talent in this organization now, okay? And it's been acquired in all kinds of ways. And, one of the biggest ways was cashing in the Juan Soto trade chip. But whatever, the talent that is here is the talent that is here. And while they're not all going to pan out, they're also not all going to miss, okay? I mean, let's be realistic about this. Some of these guys I think are going to hit. And it's just a question of to what degrees do these guys hit. But especially if Wood and Cruz and House can hit the ground running, if Gore can have that step forward season, if Abrams can take another step, this could be, I think, an exciting, promising team this year. And why the heck not? We've endured enough losing over the life of this podcast with this team. Why not have a season that makes you feel good about things? So 82-80 for the Nationals in the 2024 regular season. Two things I absolutely want to see from this team this season. Number one, more home runs. It would be hard to hit fewer homers than what the Nats did last season, but let's hit some more bombs this year, even if that comes at the expense of making contact and getting a bunch of singles. Let's hit some homers this year. I think the Nats are positioned to do more of that. And number two, the defense. I'm not sure what to make of the defense. There has been a lot of lip service paid to the defense. I'm a little troubled by some of what you have had to say and write about the defense in spring training and how things are going to end up being configured, especially with what went down with Joey Gallo, Eddie Rosario in left field, that scenario. So we'll see. But this team has not been a truly good defensive team in way too long. And one of the best ways to instantly be better is by being better defensively. And the thing about defense that I think is so interesting is that I think more so than hitting or pitching, it's something that can translate immediately from the minors to the majors. If you're a really good hitter in the minors, there is an adjustment at the major league level. If you're a really good pitcher in the minors, there is an adjustment at the major league level. If you're a really good defender in the minors, there really shouldn't be that much of an adjustment at the major league level. Good defense in the minors should be the same as good defense in the majors. And so can this team, especially with this hopeful infusion of high-level prospects, demonstrate great improvement defensively this season? I would love to see that.
I have some real concerns about their defense, unfortunately. I hate to say it, but I do worry about regression at first base from Dom Smith to Joey Gallo, regression in left field, regression at third base from what they had with Jeimer Candelario to now Nick Senzel. We don't know who's going to be at second base yet, but that could be an issue. Catcher, we've talked a lot about. But I will say, I agree with you. If Trey Lipscomb makes the team, he's going to be good defensively because he's always been good defensively. And the guy who we haven't mentioned at all, I want to just throw his name in real quick. Victor Robles had a really good spring, offensively, defensively, base running, all that stuff. He did the same thing last spring, and then he started the year really well before he got hurt. And I know he's still a punching bag, and I'm not going to sit here and try to say that he could still be a part of their future. He's not. He knows it. He knows as soon as those guys are ready, he's out the door. But he's actually played pretty well for a while now when he's been healthy. And we know what a difference his glove can make in center field. So I do like that potential for him. I do think defense is a problem. You know, the home runs thing, yeah, they're hopefully going to hit a few more home runs. But man, I'll be really interested once we get through a week or two of you watching Joey Gallo every day, what you think. He had a horrendous spring. He did not hit a home run, only had a couple of hits at all, struck out a ton. I get the sense the fan base is already conditioned to be not so optimistic about how this is going to go with Joey Gallo, and I'm really curious to see how this plays out over the season. Does he hit enough home runs to make up for everything else? Because that's really what it's going to be a matter of. So that one does concern me. I'd like more home runs, yes, but is it going to be worth it for everything else you're sacrificing with a guy like that in the middle of your lineup? But go figure. I'm Mr. Pessimism today. I'll defer back to you, Mr. Optimism, Al Galdi.
Hey, man, times are changing, so why not be glass half full? If you can't be optimistic now going into the season, when can you be optimistic? So we shall see. You tell us what you think. Hit us up on X at Nats_chat. You can email the show, natschatpodcast@gmail.com. Like I said earlier, we have a website that we invite you to check out, natschatpodcast.com. All Nationals radio highlights on Nats Chat are courtesy of 106.7 The Fan. Like I said, we are with you with a new episode for the morning after every Nats game day. So we will be back with you for an episode on Friday morning off the start of the Nationals' 20th season in Washington, D.C. For Mark Zuckerman, I'm Al Galdi. We thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on the Nats Chat Podcast.